Don't look at me that way, Roxy, I said. It's your own fault you're in the pen again. She stood on her hind legs and grasped the wire with her forepaws, looking daggers at me. I fancied I could hear her say, "You're the one who put me here." And Luis caught me and put a leash on me so I couldn't run away. Yes, I admitted to myself, we were all mixed up in the affair that ended with you once again pinned in your old yard. The first I knew about the trouble was about 5 o'clock that morning when I heard a voice calling, "David, David, come and help me." In my sleep, it sounded unreal and far away. I stirred and turned over, thinking I was dreaming. But the moment of turning half awakened me, and I knew the voice was real. It called again. I listened. It was Louise. She must be in trouble, I thought. Maybe she went outside for some reason and locked herself out. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my robe and slippers, picked up my crutch, and scurried through the house as fast as I could. Found Louise on the porch with a leash in her hand. On the other end of the leash was Roxy with a choker chain around her neck, and not a bit happy. But let me go back a little and explain what had led up to the unhappy state of affairs. We had not seen Roxy for more than a week, and we couldn't help wondering what she had been doing. At about 8:30 one evening, I started toward my room to retire. I should explain that since my accident, Luis and I had been sleeping in separate rooms so that my problems with the broken leg would not disturb her sleep. At that moment, Roxy began tugging at the door, demanding attention. I opened the door, and in she came, as hungry as could be and as active as any healthy raccoon in early March. I sat down on the floor and let her finish peanuts out of my pocket while Louise mixed up a bowl of bread and eggnog. When she had finished feasting, Roxy came and lay down beside me for a back rub. While I massaged her back and neck, she laid her head on my leg and closed her eyes for a short nap. After a few minutes, she roused, stretched, and then relaxed for another rub. This went on for almost an hour. Then I let her out and locked the door for the night. I went to my room and soon I was fast asleep. Not so Roxy. Maybe she felt we had played a mean trick on her by putting her out too soon. She must have decided that she had a right to be in her home. In any event, she went to work trying to get back in. Louise told me later that she heard Roxy jump from the tree to the roof and then snap the shingles. When that didn't seem to get any results, she ran back down the tree and rattled the back door. Back to the roof and down to the door she went, over and over for quite a while. Since the room where Louise was trying to sleep was under the roof, it was no wonder she was kept awake most of the time. Twice during the night, Louise went out to shine a flashlight in the direction of the noise. Each time the light reflected from Roxy's twinkling eyes, a mischievous twinkle, Louise thought. Louise called and Roxy came right to the edge of the roof. Thinking Roxy must still be hungry, Louise led her into the kitchen and offered her a bowl of her favorite food. But Roxy didn't want food. She began running around the kitchen as though to see if she could find anything new. She smelled some peanut brittle on the sideboard and jumped to catch hold of the edge of a drawer to climb up to the candy. It was about all Louise could do to pull the little nuisance off that drawer. Then Roxy ran over to the dining table and began climbing up the table spread. This came close to ending in a major disaster. Luis decided the whole party would have to end right there. There was entirely too much commotion going on in the kitchen in the middle of the night. She took the bowl of food out to the porch and shoved Roxy outside. She saw Kulak standing nearby, so she called him inside and kept him there long enough for Roxy to finish her meal, if she wanted it. The moment Luis let Kulak out again, Roxy rushed at him, and the two of them joined in a rough and tumble fight. Round and over they went, mingling growls and snarls. After a short time, Roxy must have decided that her 25 pounds were no match for Kulak's 130 pounds of Malamute, so she ran off into the darkness. Luis, thinking that the fight had calmed down that feisty ball of fur, went back to bed. Hardly had she gone to sleep when she was awakened by a different and louder sounds on the roof. It sounded as if the prowler was actually tearing off shingles and throwing them down the roof. Again, Luis climbed wearily out of bed and went outside. "Roxy," Luis called, "what are you doing? Come down here immediately." Roxy bounded to the tree limb and scurried down to the ground and into the kitchen. But instead of finding a bowl of food, she met a grim woman who quickly slipped a choker chain over her head and pulled it up tight around her neck. Luis pulled Roxy out the door and headed towards Roxy's old home, the penned yard. But Roxy must have guessed what Luis had in mind. She refused to go, and Luis was afraid the chain would choke the raccoon if she pulled too hard. That was when I heard the cry for help. When I looked out the kitchen door, I saw the situation. I grabbed my heavy winter cap and slipped a jacket over my robe. As soon as I stepped to the porch, Roxy jumped to my leg and climbed to my shoulders. I suppose she thought I would protect her from Luis. We started toward the cage. Somehow, Luis pulled on the leash, causing the choker to tighten. Roxy must have thought it was I who was now hurting her, so she attacked my head with teeth and claws. Fortunately, the heavy cap took the beating instead of my scalp. In a few moments, I dumped her inside the cage and fastened the gate. Even when daylight came, I went out to where I could look up and see what had happened on the roof. At first, I couldn't see anything wrong. Not a shingle was loose. Then I glanced at the spot where the roof of the lean-to portion met the gable apron. Roxy had been trying to rip out the whole end of the gable so she could get inside the attic. A few more minutes of her frantic work would have opened the way for her to get inside. Instead, she landed in prison, just as any human would when caught trying to break into a house. "Luis," I said a few days later, "maybe we should let Roxy out of the cage. She's been—" "Now, wait a minute, David," Luis broke in. "I don't want any more trouble with that rascal." "But she has been used to running loose for almost a year. It's cruel to keep our favorite pet penned up like this," I answered, pleading for Roxy's freedom. "I'm not going to have her getting into the attic. You'll have to fix the gable first." "How am I going to fix the gable when I'm still on crutches?" "That's a problem, isn't it?" Luis returned. So Roxy stayed in her pen. Something had happened to change her from a loving pet into an angry prisoner. Toward the end of April, our lovely spring weather came to a sudden end. The forecast called for heavy snow and much colder weather. I had better get ready for the change. I thought of Roxy. She was sleeping on the same old straw she had used before her escape a year ago. Even jailbirds deserve some comfort, I told myself. I was sure Roxy would appreciate some nice clean straw before the storm broke. So I took about a third of a bale to her house. Roxy was in her yard when I opened the back door of her cottage. Quickly, I pulled out the box of old straw and shoved in the new. The sound of this commotion aroused Roxy's short temper, and she came on the run, growling. I barely had time to slam the door shut. She stayed inside the cottage, beside its back door. I could hear more growls and muttering, and I wondered why she didn't appreciate my good deed of giving her a clean bed. Maybe she didn't like my sneaking into her private bedroom and changing her bedding without her permission. A few minutes later, I carried a bowl of bread and eggnog into Roxy's yard. She came out, still muttering something under her breath. She started scraping the food into her dish, and she began eating before I finished emptying the bowl. Suddenly and without warning, she leaped over her dish and with a throaty growl sank her teeth into my arm and began trying to shake it off. "Say, young lady," I exclaimed, "you certainly are touchy tonight. Where in the world did you get that nasty temper?" I could easily see that it was useless for me to prolong my visit, so I beat a hasty retreat. I stood outside the fence watching Roxy. Now and then she looked up from her eating and returned my stare with a growl. I couldn't imagine what had come over her. We had always been good friends. Now she acted like an enemy. I didn't have to be a raccoon to understand what she was saying to me. "Get out. I don't want you around. Beat it." What a change of attitude. Only a few days before, she had climbed on my knee and given me 3 kisses, coon fashion, by poking her cold nose against my chin, cheek, and forehead. Now she seemed to be wishing to do the same, but with her sharp teeth instead of her nose. I wasn't about to give her the chance. I pulled up my sleeve to see what her teeth and claws had done to my arm. Luckily, I had on 3 thicknesses of clothes, so there were only a few scratches on my skin. Roxy, no doubt, had tried to tear my arm to shreds. The next 2 days, Roxy became angry each evening as I slipped her dinner into the cage. On the morning of the 3rd day, I noticed that she had not touched the food I had placed there the evening before. I wondered what was wrong now. Maybe her temper tantrums on the last few days was a sign that she had rabies. I worried about those scratches on my arm. Maybe Roxy was dead of rabies. If so, I would have to begin the pasture treatment at once. I went to the house and told Luis about my fears. We went out together and walked around the cage to Roxy's cottage. Luis bent down and put her head close to the box. "Roxy," she called softly. Immediately a deep, bear-like growl sounded from inside. Roxy was very much alive. On the morning of the 5th day, I saw Roxy out in her yard looking for food, evidently perfectly well. I walked to the fence and held out my hand. With a vicious growl, she bared her teeth and leaped toward me. It was plain to see that her bad temper had not changed a bit. As Roxy ran to the fence and reared up on her hind legs, she revealed the secret of her problem. Plain to see on her underside were 2 rows of 3 teats each. Each teat was about the diameter of a lead pencil and about 3/4 of an inch long. Roxy had babies. I walked around the cage to the cottage, listening carefully. I heard tiny squeals inside. I fixed up Roxy's jail cell with clean straw just in time. It was actually a maternity ward.